The machine beeped high, then low, then stopped its steady rhythm entirely. Audrey gripped the plastic basin, realizing the impossible truth. Kai, the man she had fed pureed peaches for 6 months, was finally awake. His eyes, clear and cold, locked onto hers immediately. He didn't ask where he was or who she was. Instead, he whispered, his voice dry and rough, "Tell me the number for the safe deposit box you opened last week, Audrey. And don't lie about the amount inside. I've been listening." The apartment was high above the city, a place designed for function, not life. Kai sat stiffly in the Italian leather armchair, the silence heavier than the expensive air filtration system, humming softly in the corner. 6 months of coma had done nothing to soften the hard edges of his face. They were merely etched deeper by the stillness. He was awake now, fully functional, yet the paralysis of his surroundings mirrored an inner freeze. He watched the rain stripe the massive window panes, distorting the lights of the financial district into smears of gold and red. The room held no personal touch, no photos, no books, nothing that suggested continuity beyond the present moment. His expensive watch ticked loudly, a constant, irritating reminder of lost time, time spent defenseless under the care of a stranger named Audrey. He ran a thumb over the polished wood armrest. The only thing he allowed himself to look at for long periods was the reflection in the dark glass, a man who looked exactly as he had before, but who felt profoundly disconnected. He had been a myth, a solution, a consequence. Now he was just a recovering patient who remembered every muffled conversation, every bedside confession, every careless observation made by those who thought he was deaf and senseless. The past was not a memory for Kai. It was a structure he was forced to inhabit. The coldness of the marble floor under his bare feet was a physical manifestation of the isolation he had cultivated since childhood. A necessity, he always argued, to survive the world he inhabited. The world had never offered him softness, only deals and debts. He stood and walked to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water that tasted sterile. He noticed a small smudge on the stainless steel counter, likely from the nurse who had spent half a year ensuring his heart kept beating. He didn't wipe it. It was the only sign that vulnerability, even the manufactured kind that comes from medical dependence, had ever touched this space. The sight of the smudge was unsettling, a tear in the perfect, lonely fabric of his life. He raised the glass to his lips, but the water felt too heavy to swallow. He put it down, untouched. Audrey was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that permeated her every movement, a residue of working double shifts at the clinic and then coming back to manage her own small house. She had that specific weariness common to single mothers who never complain because complaining wastes energy, better spent organizing. She carried a grocery bag heavy with oranges and ground beef, balancing it against her hip as she unlocked her front door. The action was automatic, practiced hundreds of times. "Mom, can we get that big glue gun again? The one that smells like burning sugar?" her daughter Lily asked, her head buried in the sleeve of Audrey's coat, avoiding the late afternoon chill. Lily was 9, possessing a profound seriousness that contradicted her messy pigtails. "Maybe next week, sweetie. The one we have works fine for your cardboard city," Audrey replied, her voice soft but firm. She dropped the groceries on the counter and immediately began organizing the refrigerator, a small act of control in a world that felt constantly chaotic. She didn't pause for dramatic sighs or emotional venting. She simply moved, efficiently, scrubbing a stubborn jam stain off the shelf. Lily settled at the rickety kitchen table, meticulously coloring a drawing of a rocket ship with a broken wing. She wasn't demanding attention, merely existing nearby, her presence a quiet anchor. Audrey looked at her daughter's intense focus and felt a familiar surge of protective warmth. Lily had observed Kai's room during Audrey's last week on the private case, when Kai was already stirring, a sterile, silent place that frightened Lily. "Is the quiet man still quiet?" Lily asked, without looking up from her crayon. Audrey paused while wiping the counter. "No, sweetie, he woke up." She didn't elaborate on the coldness or the demand about the safe deposit box. She focused instead on heating up last night's stew. Practicality was her shield. She knew her job was done, but the ending had felt sharp, unsettling, like leaving a puzzle unfinished. She had been the only bridge between Kai's life and his near death for half a year, and now that bridge was abruptly gone. She served Lily a small bowl of stew, checking the temperature with her wrist before handing it over. It was a simple gesture, repeated every evening, showing care through action, not words. Tell me, from where in the world are you following this story? Let me know in the comments. 2 days after his recovery, Kai found Audrey. Not by tracking her, that would have been too deliberate, but by waiting until she picked up her final paycheck from the agency and observing the routine drive home. He simply drove his unmarked black sedan slowly down her street and saw the small, 2-story house with peeling paint on the porch. He parked 2 blocks away and waited. He wasn't there to threaten her about the safe deposit box, not yet. He was testing the boundaries of his own sanity. Being awake meant facing the mess he had left behind, but more acutely, it meant acknowledging the 6 months of unexpected care. He needed to see the life that had sustained him. Audrey emerged, wrestling with a stubborn trash can lid. It had frozen shut during the night, and now as she yanked at it, the plastic handle snapped off, sending her stumbling back against the rain gutter. She swore under her breath, a low, frustrated sound, and immediately looked around to make sure Lily hadn't heard the mild profanity. Kai watched from the shadow of a large oak tree. He saw the genuine, unscripted moment of vulnerability, a woman defeated by a domestic chore. It was the antithesis of his entire structured existence. He considered leaving, but the sight of the broken handle seemed too absolute, too final. He crossed the street. "It's not going to open like that," Kai said, his voice surprisingly neutral, devoid of the cold command he had used with her in the sterile room. Audrey spun around, recognizing him instantly despite the street clothes. Her posture tightened, preparing for an aggressive confrontation. "Mr. Kai, I wasn't expecting you. The check cleared." "I know," he said, walking closer. He reached for the bin, examining the broken plastic. "It's the cold and the seal is warped." He didn't look at her face. He looked only at the problem. He positioned his expensive leather loafer against the base of the can and applied pressure to the side, leveraging the body of the can against the concrete, and then, with a sharp, controlled twist of his wrist, broke the frozen seal. The lid popped open with a sudden hiss of trapped air. He stepped back immediately, wiping his hand on his pants as if the trash can had contaminated him. "You should get a new one," he stated, looking past her shoulder. "They're cheap." Audrey stared at him, holding the broken handle like evidence. "Thank you," she managed, bewildered. This man, rumored to be powerful enough to disappear entire corporations, had just fixed her frozen trash can. "Don't mention it," Kai said, already turning to leave. The connection was brief, functional, and deeply strange. A shared, silent acknowledgement of a small victory over the mundane. It felt safer than the hospital room. Kai drove away from Audrey's street, the image of the broken trash can handle strangely vivid in his mind. The small failure, the momentary defeat on Audrey's face stirred something deep within the heavily guarded vault of his memories. It was the feeling of small things breaking, and no one being there to fix them. He pulled his car into an underground parking garage and waited for the silence to return. But it didn't. The smell of cold asphalt and stale gasoline was momentarily overpowered by the phantom scent of institutional bleach and old wood. The memory was tied to a single object, a worn wooden box, no bigger than his palm, meant for holding fishing tackle. He was 6. The box had been a gift from his uncle, a rare moment of kindness from a man who usually only offered instruction and discipline. Kai cherished the box, keeping small, polished river stones inside. One afternoon, during a particularly chaotic family gathering, a collection of powerful, self-interested figures who viewed childhood as a weakness to be eliminated, he had left the box on the windowsill. When he returned, it was gone. He searched quietly for hours, asking servants and his younger cousins. Finally, his grandfather, the patriarch of the family, called him into the study. The room was dark, smelling of expensive cigars and cold ambition. The wooden box sat on the enormous mahogany desk, splintered into 4 neat pieces. "Sentimental items are liabilities, Kai," the old man had said, his voice flat. "They make you vulnerable. If you allow yourself to care about stones in a box, you won't be able to care about the things that matter: power, control, survival. He didn't scream or cry. He just stood there, staring at the shattered wood and the scattered river stones, recognizing the lesson instantly. The loss wasn't about the box or the stones. It was the realization that anything he cherished would be broken intentionally to teach him to stop cherishing. He never showed emotion again, learning instead to value silence and structure above all else. That fractured 6-year-old was the architect of the impenetrable adult, now sitting in the black sedan. Kai gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The quick, practical fix of Audrey's trash can had felt like a small, meaningless redemption for the 6-year-old who couldn't protect his own things. He needed that silence back. He needed the sterile distance. But the memory was awake now, just like him. The broken trash can incident somehow established an invisible, functional link. Kai found himself back on Audrey's street 2 days later, not to fix anything but simply to observe. He kept his distance, staying in the anonymity of his car, but the observation became less about surveillance and more about routine. Audrey, meanwhile, was perplexed, but not intimidated. The powerful man who should be busy ruling his empire occasionally appeared in a mundane black car, watching her struggle with garden hoses or stubborn porch lights. The true entanglement began when Lily saw him. It was Saturday morning. Lily was attempting to build a complex bird feeder using mismatched wood pieces and copious amounts of tape. The structure kept listing violently to the side. Kai was leaning against his car across the street, pretending to examine his phone. Lily marched over, holding the lopsided feeder like a challenge. She stopped a polite distance away, her expression serious. "My mum says you're good at fixing things that are broken," Lily stated, skipping the greetings entirely. "It needs a better fulcrum point here, but the screw keeps stripping the wood." Kai looked down at the child, then at the clumsy structure. He could have dismissed her, but the directness of her request, the absence of guile, was disarming. It reminded him of the pure practical problem-solving he valued. "It's not the screw," Kai said after a brief examination. "It's the wood grain. Too soft for that size fastener." He didn't offer to help, but Lily simply sat down on the curb near his feet and watched him with unwavering interest. The next thing Audrey knew, Kai was sitting on the edge of her porch, not working, but holding the bird feeder while Lily meticulously drove in smaller, sharper screws. With a miniature screwdriver Kai had seemingly conjured from his coat pocket. He wore a heavy, expensive sweater and tailored trousers, looking utterly out of place yet perfectly still. "He's very quiet, Mum," Lily commented later that night as Audrey tucked her in. "He just helps." Kai never stayed long, never accepted tea, and never offered any personal detail. He simply arrived when something small was slightly off, a gate needing oil, a bicycle chain slipping, fixed it with silent precision and left. He wasn't seeking conversation but competence. Yet, in those brief shared moments of practical repair, a silent, fragile understanding took root. Audrey found herself relaxing slightly in his presence, knowing he would not waste time with polite small talk or dramatic gestures. He was reliable, efficient, and unexpectedly present. The silence around her felt less like isolation and more like companionship. Kai was fixing her environment, and by doing so, he was remaining included in her safe, normal world, a routine he had never known. The fragile routine held for 3 weeks until a mundane event shattered the delicate equilibrium. Lily was helping Audrey move old boxes from the attic down to the garage. She stumbled on the landing, and the heavy box she carried slipped. It didn't contain anything valuable, just old school reports and faded drawings, but the momentum was enough to send a small antique glass lamp, a cherished piece passed down from Audrey's grandmother, crashing from a hallway table. The noise was sharp and final. Lily froze, tears welling instantly, not from pain but from the guilt of the accident. Kai, who had been oiling the squeaky back door hinge, materialized instantly in the hallway. He saw the broken pieces of iridescent glass scattered on the floor in Lily's trembling form. Audrey rushed forward, intending to comfort Lily, but Kai spoke first, his voice returning to the low, absolute command she recognized from the hospital room, the voice of the man who organized violence and loyalty. "You need to watch where you're walking," Kai stated, looking directly at Lily, his expression devoid of softness. "Carelessness costs." He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was stating a fundamental rule of his life, a reflex learned in that sterile study years ago. But to Lily and to Audrey, the statement was a cold, direct accusation against an innocent mistake. Audrey immediately stepped between Kai and her daughter, her own face hardening with protective instinct. "That's enough, Kai," she said, using his first name for the first time, her voice low and sharp. "It was an accident. She's 9. Kai's eyes flickered from Lily's tears to Audrey's fierce gaze. He saw the boundary he had crossed, not just the physical one, but the profound ethical line he had violated by applying his world's harsh calculus to hers. "Accidents are simply mistakes with high consequences," he retorted, unable to retract the ingrained survival mantra. "In your world, maybe," Audrey shot back, kneeling to shield Lily and starting to gather the large shards of glass. "In this world, they are lessons, not crimes, and she doesn't need judgment from a man who understands nothing about keeping things whole." The last words struck him with the force of a physical blow. A man who understands nothing about keeping things whole. Kai stood absolutely still, his mind retreating to the cold fortress he had built. He looked at the chaos, the glittering shards, the weeping child, and Audrey's defensive stance, and saw only confirmation of his grandfather's lesson. Proximity to vulnerability led to damage. He was the inherent liability. He turned without another word, walking out of the house and the yard. He got into his car and drove fast, leaving the small safe space he had unintentionally built. The sudden return to isolation was brutal, a sharp physical ache, but he welcomed it. It was safer there. Audrey watched him go, feeling a profound sense of failure and loss. The man who had shown up to fix her life's trivial breakages had just shattered something far more important with a single, calculated phrase. Kai returned to the sterile atmosphere of his high-rise apartment, but the familiar coldness offered no comfort. He had retreated, but the silence was now filled with the echo of Audrey's accusation. A man who understands nothing about keeping things whole. He poured himself a glass of water, remembered the water he hadn't swallowed before, and the feeling of the smudge on the steel counter. He realized he was not just retreating from them. He was retreating from the possibility of being the destructive force he had been trained to be. He had immediate, larger problems to address. His organization had faced challenges during his coma, and the financial landscape was messy. However, the safe deposit box, the one he mentioned to Audrey immediately upon waking, suddenly felt urgent. The box contained contingency plans and leverage against a powerful rival, Victor Chen, who had assumed Kai was permanently disabled. More importantly, the funds in the box were critical for a sensitive, time-limited operation meant to secure his legacy. Kai drove to the bank late that night. He used a key he kept strapped to his wrist. Inside the vault, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he found the box. The manager, a nervous elderly man, stepped away. Kai opened the box. It was empty, save for a small folded note. The note was written on the back of a hospital admission form. "I used the money to clear the mortgages on 3 properties in the clinic's network. They were about to be foreclosed. The nurses needed their jobs." It was signed, Audrey. The amount was substantial, enough to severely compromise his immediate recovery operations. She hadn't stolen it for herself. She had used it to stabilize the fragile structure of a low-income medical clinic, protecting dozens of staff and patients. It was an act of quiet ethical defense, the definition of kindness as practical action. Kai didn't react with rage. He reacted with comprehension. She had heard him talking in the coma, not just the instruction for the box number, but the specifics of its purpose, and she had chosen the livelihood of strangers over his criminal recovery. She had chosen protection over power. He closed the box, replacing the note in his pocket. He understood then what he needed to fix. It wasn't the box. It was the accusation. The next morning, Kai didn't return to the family business. Instead, he spent the day mobilizing resources, not to recover the mortgage payments, but to stabilize the clinic permanently. He set up a blind trust, anonymously endowing the clinic with enough capital to be safe from foreclosure forever. He ensured the funding flow was untraceable back to him or Audrey. He didn't do it for recognition, nor to settle the debt. He did it because he recognized the choice she had made to protect what was vulnerable. For the first time, Kai chose to support someone else's fragile structure rather than demolish it. 2 weeks passed after Kai's abrupt departure. The quiet had returned to Audrey's home, but it was a heavier, sadder quiet than before. Lily still missed the man who fixed things. Audrey missed the presence that didn't demand conversation, the silent stability that had briefly anchored their chaotic schedule. One Tuesday evening, Audrey was outside attempting to wrestle with a badly stuck garden hose reel. The handle had broken months ago, and now the entire thing was jammed, refusing to retract the coiled plastic. She was covered in dirt and frustration. A familiar black sedan pulled up the street. It stopped not 2 blocks away, but directly in front of her house. Kai stepped out, holding nothing but a small, heavy wooden box. He walked up the driveway. Audrey straightened, expecting him to demand answers about the stolen funds, or at least an explanation for his outburst. Kai stopped a few feet away. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the tangled hose reel. "I won't fix that," he said, his voice low and raspy. "It's beyond repair. You need a new reel and a plumber for the faucet leak." Audrey waited, silent. She knew this wasn't about the hose. Kai finally raised his eyes. They were guarded, but the hard light was gone, replaced by a deep, weary acknowledgement. He held out the wooden box. It was a replica of the antique fishing tackle box from his childhood, precisely crafted, sealed with a brass latch. "I asked for the safe deposit box number when I woke up. You gave it to me," Kai stated simply. "You chose to protect the clinic. I read your note." He paused, then added, "It was a good choice." Audrey took the box, the weight of the wood surprising her. She opened it. Inside, there was no money. There was only the new key to her house and a single polished river stone. The gesture was profound, communicating that he understood the value of small, cherished things and the meaning of protection. Just then, Lily appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of the car. She looked at Kai, then at the box in her mother's hands. "You're back," Lily observed, her voice utterly relieved and honest. Kai nodded, not smiling. Lily then pointed at his chest, at the expensive cashmere sweater. "You look softer now." The simple, true statement hung in the air. Kai looked down at his clothes, then back at the river stone in the box. He didn't contradict her. Audrey closed the latch on the box. "Did you take care of the bank problem?" "It's handled," Kai confirmed. "The clinic is secure permanently." He didn't need to explain the trust, the funds, or the sheer logistics. The words were enough. He had defended her silent act of kindness with his own silent act of choice. They stood in the fading light, the tangled hose reel the only witness to their contained, quiet reconciliation. The reconciliation didn't lead to large dinners or emotional confessions. It led to a shared dinner of takeout Chinese food, eaten on paper plates at the kitchen table, illuminated by the warm, slightly yellowish light of Audrey's lamp. Lily chatted freely about her school project, incorporating Kai into the conversation by asking his opinion on the structural integrity of her latest cardboard creation. Kai listened. He didn't offer advice rooted in finance or threat. He simply offered practical suggestions about adhesives and load distribution. He ate slowly, watching the easy flow of communication between mother and daughter. He wasn't accustomed to eating without a bodyguard present or discussing something as inconsequential as a school project. Audrey didn't press him for details about his life or the dangerous world he inhabited. She simply placed a clean fork next to his plate when he dropped his. It was a small, unnoticed act of care that resonated deeply in the man who had spent 6 months being cared for, and years before that, ensuring no one ever got close enough to bother. Later, after Lily was asleep, Audrey stood in the living room folding laundry. Kai watched her from the doorway. He wasn't invited to stay, but neither was he told to leave. He simply existed within the house's perimeter of warmth. "Why didn't you just take the money for yourself?" Kai asked, the question hanging heavy in the quiet air. Audrey paused her folding, holding a small T-shirt against her chest. "I needed to know I was still me, Kai. The money was yours to lose. The clinic was the only thing standing between those nurses and homelessness. My loyalty is practical. It's to the people who need a shield, not to the ones who carry a sword. Kai nodded, absorbing the simple, profound philosophy. He understood the difference now. He had spent his life valuing control. Audrey valued protection. He walked over to the hallway table. He picked up the remnants of the broken glass lamp. He had examined the shards weeks ago, realizing that the glass was too old and unique to be easily replaced or repaired without extensive effort. He gently placed the pieces back in the box he had brought, the new wooden box alongside the riverstone and the house key. He looked around the small, slightly messy room, the stacks of books, the mismatched furniture, the drawing pinned crookedly to the wall, and felt the absence of his former isolation. "Lily says she wants a cat," Kai stated. Audrey smiled faintly, returning to her folding. "We don't have the space, and it would break too many things." Kai watched her quiet movements. "We can get a house with space," he said, the words sounding more like a statement of fact than a question. He meant we, not as romance, but as a unit of protection, a shared structure against the cold. Audrey stopped folding, looking at the door, then back at him. She saw not the Mafia boss, but the man who silently fixed squeaky gates and defended vulnerable clinics. "Family," Audrey said, quietly finishing her thought, "is what you choose to protect when you have the power not to." Kai looked at the small room and the woman who had cared for him when he was defenseless. "I choose this." If this story of silent protection and unexpected family resonated with you, please show your support. Give this video a like, comment below with your favorite part, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply emotional stories about human connection.